Okay, I'd like to reconvene the meeting at 10:44. I'd like to welcome Ms. Isra Ahmad to the table for her interview and turn the time over to Mr. Dawson for the 5 standard questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Ahmad, I'm going to ask you 5 standard questions that the panel has asked each of the applicants to respond to. Are you ready, ma'am?
Yes.
Thank you. First question. What skills and attributes should all commissioners possess? What skills or competencies should the commission possess collectively? Of the skills, attributes, and competencies that each commissioner should possess, which do you possess? In summary, how will you contribute to the success of the commission?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. It's quite a journey to get to this point, so I appreciate that. To answer your question, the commission collectively should possess the ability to be independent from political influences, competent in a variety of analytical skills such as understanding basic statistics and data, interpreting and applying relevant laws and regulations, the basics of mapping and spatial reasoning, lessons learned from experiences that display authentic community engagement and appreciation for the diversity in California, including but not limited to racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, economic, and geographic diversity. Commissioners should also evidence their interest and expertise in the importance of California's democratic processes, such as voting and elections, redistricting, the goals of redistricting and the purposes, the history of gerrymandering broadly, California's role in gerrymandering, and more recently, California's leading role in ending gerrymandering and partisan redistricting. The commission should also possess skills needed to interact with a diverse community across California, such as language diversity, knowledge of resources for community members, and the ability to reassure and advocate for the process of redistricting under the Voters First Act. I personally possess a variety of these skills and attributes. I've earned my master's degree from UC Berkeley in epidemiology and biostatistics. During my academic training, I learned the importance of social epidemiology and how systems and structures in our environment can impact health, including our political systems. Earlier this year, I enrolled in a community college course to further enhance my understanding of spatial reasoning and mapping best practices. The course focuses on using ArcGIS, understanding map design, dissecting topographic and isoline maps, and creating qualitative and quantitative thematic maps, which are often used for population-based indicators such as voting patterns and population density. I've spent quite some time traveling up and down California, for my volunteer work and leisure commitments. But it wasn't until I started traveling outside of California that I truly began to appreciate what we have here at home. The vast diversity in backgrounds, cultures, food, language, music, and upbringing is what makes our state the Golden State of America. In terms of skills interacting with diverse communities, I've had ample experience through my volunteer and public service work interacting with diverse and some of our most vulnerable and underserved populations. For example, as a manager of a Second Harvest food bank site, I served an economically underserved neighborhood in East San Jose. I organized hundreds of pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables that would be delivered to a local elementary school and worked with volunteer mothers from the community to distribute this food. I developed a relationship with the mothers of the community who made up the largest proportion of my volunteer group on any given distribution day. The mothers of the community often coached me on my Spanish-speaking skills, and we all laughed together as I stumbled upon incorrect conjugations of various words. Now, as a public servant at Santa Clara County Public Health Department, I've increased my area of service to jurisdictions within the county, particularly in the realm of tobacco control. As a public health issue that impacts communities of color and low socioeconomic neighborhoods at disproportionate rates, I work to understand and disseminate the most up-to-date research and impacts of use of tobacco products. I'm also fluent in Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, and I'm continuing to learn my Spanish skills conversationally. In summary, I will contribute to the success of the Commission by bringing all of my lived and professional experiences as considerations and input into the planning and executing of a cohesive and inclusive Commission to ensure that our Californian communities feel heard and represented.
Thank you. Question 2. Work on the Commission requires members of different political backgrounds to work together. Since the 2010 Commission was selected and formed, the American political conversation has become increasingly polarized, whether in the press, on social media, and even in our own families. What characteristics do you possess, and what characteristics should your fellow commissioners possess that will protect against hyperpartisanship? What will you do to ensure that the work of the Commission is not seen as polarized or hyperpartisan, and avoid perceptions of political bias and conflict?
The characteristics that I possess that will contribute to alleviating the increasingly polarized political conversation are the important yet very underappreciated skills of active listening, open-mindedness, and understanding. Oftentimes, listening to someone who may have differing opinions or views than yourself can create an avenue of mutual understanding between previously misunderstood parties. I think it's important to listen instead of listening to respond. Keeping an open mind will also prove to be helpful. In my own family, there are some very strong opposing political viewpoints, but one thing we can all agree on is the importance of ensuring every person has equitable access to the basic human needs. It's just the avenue to get to that goal that creates this sense of partisanship. I'm sure that there will be times that the commissioners will have differing viewpoints as to how to approach a situation or tackle an obstacle. However, I will bring an open mind, evaluate the circumstances, look at the data, and give my informed opinion and suggestion on how to move forward. And I would expect nothing less from my fellow commissioners as well. If other commissioners have a better idea than my own, I will gladly step aside and support the best idea, because in the end, we all have the same goal. To make sure that the work of the Commission is not seen as polarized or hyper-partisan, I'll make sure that I play my role in following the guidance of Bagley-Keene and work to ensure that the public is well informed of all the steps that the Commission takes. In doing so, similar to this application process, the public will be able to make assessments on their own and bring forth any issues or concerns for consideration to the Commission. On similar feet, I have some experience in my current position to show my understanding of similar laws and regulations in the applicability of the Brown Act to ensure that the public has ample opportunities to share their opinions and/or concerns over issues that may impact them. For example, when working on tobacco control policies and policies that are being discussed at the Board of Supervisors meetings, my team and I work to send out informational letters to retailers and those businesses that may be impacted by such policies. Oftentimes, these business owners and retailers will provide public comment and make their voices heard at these meetings. It is with these experiences that I'm confident that the Commission will not be seen as hyperpartisan or polarized.
Thank you. Question 3. What is the greatest problem the Commission could encounter, and what actions would you take to avoid or respond to this problem?
I think the greatest problem that the Commission will encounter is elevating this important work within the context of our lived reality. We are for sure in unprecedented times in our politics, but now we are also living through a pandemic. The Commission will have to work to meet legislative deadlines, outreach to communities, and travel up and down California while maintaining new and fast-changing guidelines and recommendations from the California Department of Public Health, the CDC, and local government agencies in the communities that we visit. We're already seeing the impact of this pandemic on outreach for the census and the urgency for competing priorities in our communities. And when the Commission convenes in August, they will have to assess fully what the context in California looks like To respond to this problem, I would recommend that we start commission work by assessing the complete social and economic picture of Californian communities to ensure that our work can be framed in the context of our new lived reality. We'll have to ask ourselves questions like, how will we outreach to communities? Will we hold online meetings? How will we ensure that communities of interest have access to these online meetings? Completing a full evaluation of where Californians are at the inception of the commission can play a role in alleviating some of the concerns that communities may have going into this important work.
Question 4. If you are selected, you will be one of 14 members of the commission, which is charged with working together to create maps of the new districts. Please describe a situation where you had to work collaboratively with others on a project to achieve a common goal. Tell us the goal of the project, what your role in the group was, and how the group worked through any conflicts that arose. What lessons would you take from this group experience to the commission if selected?
Well, the most recent example that comes to mind is when I was activated for a number of days to report to the Medical Joint Health Operations Center at Santa Clara County Public Health Department. The goal of the Public Information Officers team, which is the team that I served on, is to share the most up-to-date and accurate information regarding COVID-19. I specifically worked on responding to public inquiries, directing emails to the call center if necessary, and developing a presentation for the Board of Supervisors meeting. The group was working long hours, and the sense of urgency to gather information, get it approved, and disseminated was nothing like I've ever experienced in my professional career thus far. The types of conflicts that arose were more along the lines of deadlines and timelines. Since there is and continues to be an urgency to disseminate up-to-date and accurate information, multiple avenues as to how to achieve this goal were often presented. We discussed the options as a group at our daily check-ins and discussed the pros and cons of any given approach. Given the diversity in experiences of the group, we were able to come to creative solutions that would best address the growing concerns in our community. There are several key lessons from this experience that I will carry with me on my future commitments, including the commission, if I were selected. 1, as a government employee and as an extension of the state of California via the commission, it's of utmost importance to continuously remind oneself of our purpose. I went into public service to help people and help those communities that are disproportionately impacted by our social, economic, and political structures and systems. While serving at the Operations Center, I was often reminded of this when engaging with a member of the public or when interacting with other team members on this very important and critical public health issue. Second, no one wins if one group member loses. And what I mean by this is that when we're working towards a common goal, it's absolutely critical that every member of the team has a clear understanding of the goal and purpose. Without this, we lose efficiency, cohesiveness, and quality of the end product. It's okay to take the time to make sure everyone understands, and it's also okay to stand up and say that you don't understand. Third, communication is key. Reiterating statements, rewording questions back to the asker, thinking openly and loudly can all serve as agents to efficient and high-quality work. This can also get team members thinking in different ways and potentially produce an idea that would otherwise be left unheard. I fully intend on taking these reminders and lessons learned with me if I were called upon to serve California via this commission.
Thank you. Question 5. A considerable amount of the commission's work will involve meeting with people from all over California who come from very different backgrounds and a wide variety of perspectives. If you were selected as a commissioner, what skills and attributes will make you effective at interacting with people from different backgrounds and who have a variety of perspectives? What experiences have you had that will help you be effective at understanding and appreciating people and communities of different backgrounds and who have a variety of perspectives.
Sure. Some skills and attributes that would make me effective at interacting with people from different backgrounds are the skills of knowing when and how to show empathy, active listening, public speaking, cultural humility. For example, as a lecturer for an undergraduate epidemiology course at San Jose State University, I exercised all of these skills. Each semester, I taught about 30 students. My students were from a variety of racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, gender identity, political, geographic, age, and developmental ability backgrounds. I was tasked with the goal of measuring the retention of learning outcomes among my students. Each class, I made sure to set aside time at the beginning to check in with my students. There were times when I would spend a few minutes opening the course, and other times when much longer discussions had to be had given the current events happening in my students' lives. Taking this time to make sure that I was even-toned and supportive of all my students, regardless of their backgrounds, was absolutely imperative to their success in my course. I had students for whom English was a second language. I've had students with learning barriers, students who came to class after working 2 jobs, students who drove from Elk Grove to get to class, other students who walked 5 minutes to get to class. There were students who were just getting by in class and students who were excelling beyond expectation for the course. My students taught me the importance of unconditional support and challenged me to unlock a new level of professionalism. These experiences will allow me to be effective at understanding and appreciating communities of different backgrounds in my work with the Commission.
All right, at this point, we will go to panel questions. Each panel member will have 20 minutes to ask his or her questions, and we will begin with the chair, Mr. Coe.
Thank you, Mr. Dawson. Good morning, Ms. Ahmad. Thank you for being here. You mentioned that you're taking a course in mapping and spatial reasoning. Where was that through?
I'm taking it through Foothill Community College.
Okay. And is that ongoing or have you completed?
It will be finished next week.
Next week, okay.
Yes.
Since you're right at the tail end of it, have you garnered things from that class that you think would be particularly helpful to work on this commission, and if so, what would those be?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things I've learned in the class is the display of data in a unique way, namely maps. As a researcher by training, I often make tables and charts and those sorts of things, but this class has taught me that there is a different way to present data. There's a way that we can detect patterns in unique ways, and I think that will be very important to the work of the Commission, considering that these maps are maps and they're based on geography, they're based on clusters of humans, and I think that will be really helpful towards the work of the Commission. I actually signed up for the course specifically because of this process.
You mentioned finding patterns in the data. Are you guys using census data as part of that, or what type of data are you looking for patterns in?
So the use of data is open to the students. Students can source whichever data that they feel they're interested in. I personally have used census data and census tract data, namely looking at Santa Clara County area, just because I'm familiar with that jurisdictional layout, but using census data, demographics, and such.
Okay, thank you. In your application, you mentioned that you were a mentor for, I'm not sure if it was an organization or group, called Getting into Graduate School. Can you tell us a little bit about what Getting into Graduate School did or does?
Yes, so the program Getting into Graduate School, also called GIGS, is a program at UC Berkeley, and graduate students are chosen to be mentors during their time while in their academic studies. So I'm no longer a mentor for that program since I have graduated, but that program is designed to help undergraduate students pursue graduate school, and primarily those students who are underrepresented in graduate school. So students of color, students with physical or mental disabilities, students with history of not having access to education. So I was paired up with my mentee who was really interested in going to medical school. She's a first-generation college student. She didn't have resources at home to pursue that avenue. So my goal and my purpose in that program was to sort of guide her in different programs that are available, different scholarship opportunities that she can look into, kind of guide her in the skills of informational interviewing and networking, those sorts of things. And she eventually ended up going to graduate school.
So in your role, you were assigned a single mentee in their goal to reach graduate school?
Yes, yes. So there are some folks who were assigned multiple depending on the need. And that particular year that I signed up to be a GIGS mentor, I was assigned one mentee.
It was just one for the year? Did you only have one in your role
Yes,
there? Okay.
yes.
Is there anything that you learned from that process that you think would be helpful to this commission?
I think that something that I learned from that process that I can apply to this commission would be just the idea of storytelling. Listening to my mentee talk about her experiences, talk about her struggles and her vision and her goals for the future really gave me a sense of motivation, a sense of urgency to go out and help her find these resources to get to where she wants to go. I think that can be transferred directly to the work of the commission, as we will be going out to different communities, and these communities will have a vision of what they want California to look like. And I feel like it would be our responsibility as a commission to translate that vision into reality for them.
Okay, thank you. In your impartiality essay, and a little bit earlier, you referenced your role with the Santa Clara County Public Health Department. And in your essay, you specifically describe your participation in public meetings to gather the insight of community members and other stakeholders. Can you provide us with an example of a time that you were provided with information from community members during these meetings that caused you to maybe change your approach or change your mind on a particular issue?
So I can speak to tobacco control, since that's my day-to-day job, and in the context of why I attend some of these public meetings. The most recent example that comes to mind was attending a City of San Jose priority setting session with their city council, in which different issues were being voted on to be prioritized within the city. One of those issues is flavored tobacco use. There was quite a few folks who showed up for either side of the issue, and listening to these stories, listening to folks who would be impacted by such a policy really opened my eyes that we as public servants have to take into consideration everyone's opinions and viewpoints. Tobacco control, believe it or not, is still a very contested issue. The facts are out there, the research is out there. There's no more research needed to determine that tobacco control or tobacco use is harmful to folks' health. So it just really sparked an interest in myself to kind of figure out what creative solutions can we have when such policies may impact someone's livelihood. And as a government agency and folks who work for the people, it's our responsibility to do that.
In your essays and a little earlier, you were referencing the diverse groups of people that you have worked with in one capacity or another. What is it that you have learned from the perspectives of these different groups of people that would assist you on this commission?
I think one of the biggest things I've learned, in addition to everything I've mentioned, is that I'm not always right. And it's a really humbling thought to carry with myself. As someone who's had the privilege and honor to be a product of California's public school systems, from K through 12 to community college to the CSU to the UC system, we are taught that we are educated, that we have a toolbox of knowledge. However, that's one type of knowledge. Listening to diverse populations has taught me that letters behind your name doesn't necessarily mean that you know what's best for a community. And going into this work, I think that's the idea that I will carry with me first and foremost, is that yes, this commission was compiled around some skill sets that were desired to do the actual work, but we are not the experts. The community is the experts. The community will tell us where their populations of interests are and what issues that they're facing, where they would like to see change. And it would be our responsibility to take that information wholeheartedly and open-mindedly.
So speaking of communities, the one of the biggest roles the commission is going to play in their work is to identify communities of interest throughout the state, and some of those communities are easier to find than others.
Mm-hmm.
How would you have the commission go about identifying communities of interest, particularly those that may be harder to identify and locate?
So that job just got exponentially harder, given our current climate. I think where we need to go to find communities of interest are those non-traditional avenues. So we need to go to faith-based leaders. We need to go to synagogues. We need to go to temples, churches, mosques. We need to go to where the people are. So day-to-day jobs, we need to go to grocery stores. We need to advertise community meetings at local libraries and community centers. There's a concept in statistics of selection bias, and the folks who are going to show up to our community meetings will show up. It's the folks who are not in the room that we need to be able to find and locate. So we have a starting point, which is the folks who will show up to the meetings. I would suggest that we ask the folks in the room which voices are missing, which voices are not here, which voices couldn't make it to this meeting for whatever reason, and start from there.
So once you've found the communities, some may not be comfortable for one reason or another actually coming and engaging the commission and sharing their perspectives on various issues. How would you go about having those particular groups feel comfortable to open up and provide perspective to the commission?
So I think we're going to have to get creative in this manner, and I think I have a sense of what you're alluding to. For folks who are not 100% comfortable coming into this type of environment, more likely than not, they have a leader or a community leader, a community role model that is comfortable coming into such an environment or who is familiar with this type of environment. I would suggest that we tap into that person. We make sure that that person understands that our goal is to make sure everyone's voices are heard, and asking that person to play the role of community leader and make sure that we hear the voices that couldn't make it to the space.
So hearing your talk and thinking about your educational background as an epidemiologist and within the current context of life today, do you think that considering the way things are currently, the current situation, that if you were to serve on the commission, you would have a unique responsibility given your expertise in how they go about the business?
I think so, and I would hold that true to the rest of the commissioners as well. As a public servant and as someone who's held community meetings, attended community meetings for a number of years, we never go into these community meetings with just our agenda item. We also come in with resources that community may need. Oftentimes, the public doesn't know where to contact and what agency to contact for mental health services or services for food or those sorts of things. So I think my particular commitment to public health is going to play a unique role in this commission and the work moving forward. The way things are going is scary, and I understand the public concern around it. And I think my role will have to also be able to communicate with the public that, yes, there are some uncertainties moving forward. We are doing the best job. Folks are working around the clock. There are precautions that we've outlined. There are best practices that we know our local and federal agencies and state agencies as well are taking action, and kind of elevate that, how this work can relate to potentially preventing or alleviating any future similar situation. And I believe that this work is directly linked to that.
Okay, thank you. If you were to be appointed to the commission, which aspects of that role do you think that you would enjoy the most or be very successful at? And conversely, which aspects of the role do you think you might perhaps struggle with a little bit?
I think the part that I would enjoy the most is listening to stories. I would love to go out into different communities, learn about California, learn how different things operate. Being from the Bay Area, I can call an Uber. I was listening to another interview last week, and he mentioned that there's only one Uber, and that kind of shocked me a little bit. So I think I would really enjoy moving around California and looking and learning from different communities to see how other folks live, and recognize that these folks and these communities are a fabric of California, and they're what make California, California, and the best state in the country, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any additional questions. Ms. Dickinson?
Good morning, Ms. Ahmad.
I didn't mention the thing that I would struggle with.
Oh, you're right about that. I apologize.
Sorry. Similar to what we were talking about previously, I think what I would struggle with is elevating this work and the importance of this work in the context of our reality, and also being able to balance sensitivity. We will be going into communities that will still be facing the impacts of what is happening today. So recognizing where we would have to step up, and recognizing where we need to take a step back, and what role we're going to play in community healing moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll turn the time over to Ms. Dickinson.
Good morning, Ms. Ahmad. In your first essay, you talked about your grandmother's experience. And you talk about how the journey led to mistrust in the political system and shed light on the corruption and greed that was entrenched in that. How will your grandmother's experience, how has her experience influenced you?
It's influenced me immensely. She, because of the political system from where she grew up, she never really had a home. The only home she knew, she was removed from. So when I think about her experience, and I think about where I am as a California native, if someone were to come to my door and say, "You can't live in California anymore," I would be absolutely brokenhearted. So I think the years, and my grandmother lived with me her whole life, or my whole life, I should say, since she came to the States. And I think what I took from the countless stories and obstacles that she's had to face is that we're not too different from her reality. There are still people out here in California who are fearful of whether they're still going to be here tomorrow. There are people who don't trust the government. There's people who don't think we're doing the best that we can do. And a part of my choosing to be a public servant was to correct that misperception. And I think being in the position that I am in now, I'm able to talk to my community and say, hey, I work for the government, and this is what we're doing to help communities, and kind of alleviate some of that tension, some of that mistrust. I don't know how the future will look like moving forward from current events, but I do know that I myself can play the role that I have been playing in kind of bridging that gap between community and government. And I would expect my fellow commissioners, by virtue of being interested in this opportunity, also would do that.
You also talked about your own experience as a first-generation Muslim American woman of color living with multiple sclerosis. So, how has your own experience influenced your perspective on the needs of communities and their preference for representative and what role those representatives should play?
I think my intersectional identities have definitely shed light on that, and it's been more of a stepwise approach to understanding this concept in my mind. So I was born in this color, so I've always experienced living in this color. I was born a woman. I identify as a woman. So those certain experiences have followed me throughout life. Some of these things are more recent. I'm recently practicing hijab. I was diagnosed with MS in 2016, and just the differences in our culture that I have been sometimes fortunately and sometimes unfortunately exposed to for folks who have different backgrounds. And I can draw on one example specifically with MS. Under some guidance and laws, it's considered a disability, but clearly I walked in here. So there are some nuances into how on paper I would be categorized versus how I live my life. And I think that this has shed a light in terms of what communities may need if they're also experiencing something that may be invisible. There are certain leadership qualities that they're looking for. There are certain folks who they would get behind, who would advocate for people who are experiencing things that may not be visible to the naked eye. I know that has definitely changed my perspective on who I would support and who is actually cognizant of the differing backgrounds of communities. So I expect that my learning will definitely continue throughout the years. I would hope so, and I would want that moving forward. But to this date, my intersectional identities follow me, and I will carry that into the work of the commission to understand that I may not know the whole picture just by looking at someone and walking in with that mindset.
Thank you. You mentioned a while ago that you've traveled for your volunteer work, I believe you said, and that some of those experiences helped you appreciate California's diversity even more. Can you talk a little bit about what experience it was that made you appreciate California?
So it was actually when I travel outside of California. So I've visited internationally. I've been to Pakistan, which is where my parents are from, and Malaysia. I've done some work with the Truth Initiative, which is a DC-based nonprofit, and their service area is the whole of the United States in the realm of tobacco control. So I traveled quite a bit with them to different states, and it's the feeling of when the plane lands in San Jose Airport that I'm like, I'm home. And that feeling became more and more apparent as I traveled across the country. California is just a unique place. We have so many different types of people here. We have different types of backgrounds, cultures, food, language, music. We are the state of innovation. We are the state of, and we birth new technology. I haven't seen the progress that I would like to see in various social, economic, cultural areas that I have in California anywhere else. Yes, we have our issues. No state is issue-free, but time and time again, we're just ahead of the game. And this process, this work proves that once again, we're ahead of the game.
Thank you. So you also talk about advocacy that you do for health equity, and you've talked about advocating for different groups. What do you see the role of the commission in advocacy and in adjudication?
So in education, I can tackle that one first. I think the role of the commission, in the context of our work, we would be tasked with educating the public on the basics of gerrymandering, the basics of, cracking and packing, and the concepts within drawing lines and how that would influence the individual person. I think that there's still a sense of confusion about what this all means, why this work is important, and why this work came to the people and left the legislature. And I think we, as a commission, would have to do our part in educating the public in this. And I see multiple reasons as to why. One, just so that our communities are educated and they're aware that this is how California does things. And they can, domino effect educate their people as well. And then also as an avenue to think about the future. In 10 years, this is going to happen again. And what a better time to advocate and educate the public about this process than when we're completing the process. And so I think those are some important areas that I would advocate and educate in.
So based on your answer, that you believe the commission's role in advocacy has to do with the process, advocating for the process?
Yes, advocating for the process, advocating for engagement from the public in the process, and trusting the process and trusting the people that you all select for completing the project.
Okay, thank you. In your other relevant material, you also talked about your participation will inspire people like you to be active in the government systems. And then you also talked about that you intend to use social media to increase awareness of the commission and its goals. What do you think the appropriate amount of social media use for the commission would be?
I think personally, I would leave my opinions out of it. I think that's just a virtue of serving on the commission, is to leave personal opinions out of it. When I say using social media, I'm thinking more along the lines of advertising community meetings, communicating if there's cancellations, scheduling changes, advertising the websites in which we would be posting updated information, those sorts of things. So less of like personal opinions and more of informational. I do believe that there is a population that gets their information from social media, and it would be a mistake if we weren't readily available and present on that platform.
Can you tell us about some of the different concerns in the communities within the Central Coast or Santa Clara County that you're aware of?
Yeah, so I actually have family out in Fresno and Merced area, so I have some exposure to the inland and then Central Coast area, should be South Bay. I think one of the biggest community concerns right now is probably the housing crisis, availability of affordable housing, access to that housing. There's also a concern of gentrification occurring. In the Bay, they're often referred to as transplants, so folks who came from elsewhere for job opportunities, primarily in the tech industry, and the displacement that's occurring for communities that have been in the area for generations. That concern exists, but there's also an appreciation for the new technology, the new ways in which our innovation is bettering lives in our area as well. So I think there is definitely, some concerns, but there's also an appreciation for what's changed in our community. Does that answer your question?
So you also mentioned Fresno. So thinking about housing in Santa Clara versus Fresno, do you think those concerns would be the same, be different?
I think this is just based off of the family that I have, so it's not inclusive of everyone in that area, in the Fresno inland area. I think there are some similarities, and there's also some differences in the concerns related to housing. From the South Bay area, it's primarily even having access to housing, finding housing, and then an added layer on top of that would be the prices and the affordability of housing. From what I've heard from my family in the Fresno, Merced area, there's more availability of housing, but they have different socioeconomic issues that community is dealing with that can impact overall attainment of housing.
Five minutes.
Thank you. So, just based on this conversation that we have just had, what do you believe are some of the influences that can influence someone's preference when they're looking for representation? And how do you think that's going to differ in the various regions throughout the state?
I think some of the things that would influence preference for folks' representation are the issues that are present in their community. Oftentimes, we all look for leaders who speak to us. They're speaking to the whole, but we want to feel like they're speaking to us and the issues that matter to us. In terms of the second part of your question, you asked differences, right?
Yeah, how do you think that's going to differ for the various regions throughout the state?
I think depending on what the issue is, the social issue within a given community, it's definitely going to differ. For the Bay Area, again, it's probably something around housing, livable wages, those sorts of issues. For the inland area, it might be something completely different related to access to water, access to agricultural goods. So I expect it to differ amongst different communities. And I'm looking forward to learning from the communities.
The first 8 commissioners are selected randomly, and then they select the the next 6. What would you be looking for if you were one of the first 8 and you were tasked with selecting the next 6? What would you be looking for in those commissioners?
So as an evaluator, my evaluator hat goes on. I would look at the pool of the 8 randomly selected commissioners. I would evaluate the skills and attributes that those 8 have, identify where the gaps lie, and then look at the remaining 6 spots to be for those folks who would fill those gaps. All the while considering the original criteria that the voters first outlined, so diversity in gender, diversity in socioeconomic status, diversity in racial ethnic backgrounds as well. So that's where I would start.
What would you ultimately like to see the commission accomplish?
I think ultimately I would love to see the commission accomplish the goal of mapping fair and equitable maps that are created with the input of community, maps that we can stand behind and support and confidently say that these maps represent California, and we were able to get input from Californians for these maps. That would be the gold standard outcome for this work.
Thank you. I don't have further questions right now.
Thank you. Mr. Belknap.
Yeah, thank you for being here. How many years have you been with the Santa Clara County Public Health Department?
It will be 4 years in August.
Okay, and what's your role?
I am the research and evaluation lead for the Tobacco-Free Communities program.
Okay. So what are some of the things that you've done in that role that demonstrate your ability to be impartial?
Well, as a tobacco control advocate, clearly I have a bias. Clearly there's a stand that I take when it comes to tobacco control issues. However, being in a public serving role, there is still a sense of me listening to community and hearing community. So every day is a balance between my own personal opinions on this issue and impartiality. I think that's something that we all have to carry as government employees.
So your personal opinion on the issue is that people shouldn't smoke? That
Yes, my personal opinion is that tobacco should not exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your job is to try to get tobacco use to go down?
Yes, my job is more to educate and inform the public on the harms related to tobacco use. We respond to jurisdictions who come to the county level asking for either data or information related to use rates of different types of tobacco products in their communities.
Yeah. And that brings me back to, so who in the community are you listening to where you're having to balance and be impartial? What are you talking about?
These are the people who would be impacted the most financially, which are retailers and clerks. These folks come to community meetings, they come to city council meetings and express their concerns about, you know, the current policies that may be on the table of, you know, prohibiting the sale of flavored tobacco products or increasing the age to 21 to purchase tobacco products. I think that there is validity in some of these arguments in which that their livelihood will be impacted if such a policy goes through. So practicing the impartiality of being able to listen to these comments, understand these comments, and look at the issue as complex as it is in our society, clearly displays my ability to be impartial.
Don't you want their livelihoods to go away? At least that portion of their livelihoods, this selling of tobacco, to go away?
I mean, ideally, I would like it that their livelihood is not impacted at all, that they find another alternative product like an apple or fruits and vegetables or those sorts of things that can supplement the loss that they may feel from the restrictions of selling tobacco products. In California, we are hovering around a 10 to 11% adult tobacco use rate of combustible cigarettes. We're at the all-time low in recorded history for our state. In talking to clerks, which we do quite often, been yelled at many times, and and the opposite of like, yes, keep up this work, all from clerks, so or owners of retail shops. I think there's a place where we can come together and help our communities thrive without the use of tobacco products and without the sale of these harmful products.
Okay. So looking over or thinking to your work experience, also your life experience, your volunteer experience, can you think of any other examples where you've had to exercise impartiality?
Yes. So as an instructor, I'll hone in on a very memorable example from my teaching days. There were two students who were in conflict with one another in a group project. And as the instructor, I cannot, and I could not find it in my heart to take one side over another, because both students were feeling hurt and unheard. So my role was to listen to both of these students. So what I did specifically was meet with each of these students individually to hear their side of the story. And then based off of their stories, I was able to identify where there was a very apparent miscommunication that occurred. So then I asked each of those students if it was okay to meet as a group, and they both agreed. So the three of us, myself and my two students, we met as a group, and I highlighted that, this whole issue came up because of XYZ that had occurred in the communication channel between you two. And in reality, there's no conflict here. You all just didn't receive the information the way the other person intended. They didn't end up being best friends after the course, but they were able to successfully complete the group project, which I was really proud of them for.
So in your work, you prepare evaluation reports.
Mm-hmm.
What's an evaluation report?
So it's a little different than the academic setting of a research report. So an evaluation report, the intention is to look at a type of program or policy and see if it's actually working. So in my specific role at the county, an example would be a smoke-free multi-unit housing policy that had passed in Sunnyvale, California. So my role was to look at the impacts of this policy. So before the policy was adopted and enforced, I hired volunteers to go out and do an impact assessment of different multi-unit housing complexes. So gathering data on where there's tobacco litter, where there's signage, before the policy was enforced and adopted. And then once the policy had been in place for 6 months, these same volunteers would go out to these same multi-unit housing complexes to measure the same indicators. And then we would look at the pre-post to determine if the policy was having an impact. Of course, there's a lot of confounding factors that may play a role. There's culture that plays a role. There's weather of the time of measurement. There's political will at that time. So there's a lot of different factors that would play a role in the outcome, but essentially the evaluation report would encompass all of these different things that could influence the outcome as well as the actual evaluation of such a policy.
So your job in that particular element of it is to analyze whether particular tobacco cessation policies are working or not, or
Yes.
to what level they're working. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you incorporate public input into those reports.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that necessary, and then how do you obtain that public input?
So in our county, we actually have a tobacco-free community coalition, and this coalition is made up of representatives from different CBOs, community-based organizations, as well as community residents. So prior to the submission of any report, we would bring that report to these tobacco-free coalition meetings for input from the folks at the meetings. And sometimes, it depends on the folks who show up for that particular meeting. Sometimes there's very little input. Sometimes there's things that I even hadn't thought of that need to be incorporated in the report. So based off of the feedback, I would take it back, make edits, revise, bring it back to the coalition for final input before submission to the state.
Okay, thank you. Submission to the state, who does it go to?
California Tobacco Control Program.
And is that with Department of Public Health?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, that was just curious. The California Youth Advocacy Network, I saw you refer to that in your application. What is that group?
So it's a tobacco education and advocacy group based out of Sacramento. And they work with college students to increase advocacy and awareness of tobacco-related issues in California specifically. During my time with CYAN, I was at San Jose State University. I worked with them to help adopt and educate our San Jose State community about the harms of tobacco control. I also had the opportunity to go out to Long Beach for the CSU Board of Trustees meeting to present to all of the presidents of the CSU system. And their overall objective is to continue to increase awareness and education about this issue in California specifically.
And are you a volunteer or are you representing Santa Clara Public Health Department? Like, what's your role in that?
Within CYN?
Yeah, how did you get into the network? Through
Yeah.
your work or through volunteer?
So this was pre my working days. This is
Okay.
when I was still an undergraduate student. I found an announcement for an internship opportunity at San Jose State University. So I applied for that internship opportunity, and through that internship, CYN was, I'm getting into the weeds of this, CYN was contracted by Santa Clara County Public Health to do tobacco control related projects in the county. So that's how I found them.
Okay.
Once my commitment with the internship ended, an opportunity opened up at CYN to continue the work.
Okay. Are you still with CYN?
No, I'm not.
No. Okay.
I have aged out.
Okay. And you mentioned some of your travels, so I didn't catch them all, but how much did you travel as part of CYN?
Within California specifically?
Yeah, within California.
So I would travel to different college campuses, so Sacramento, Fresno, Long Beach. I think we went to LA. This was quite some time ago. And that was all in the realm of tobacco control with CYN.
And you mostly focused in the college campus environment.
Yes, it was college campuses.
All right, I want to return to a statement you made that I was interested in hearing more about. I think it might have been the tail end of one of your answers to Mr. Koh's question. I want you to expand on how the commission's work is linked to communities being prepared for public health crises.
So this commission will be tasked with drawing these lines, and all based off of the census. And as I'm sure you all know, the implications of the census and federal funding and how that feeds into drawing these lines and how that will directly feed into funding at the local level. And funding is being cited as one of the biggest barriers and obstacles in what we are seeing today. I should say lack thereof funding. So I think drawing that link between the work of the commission and how this will directly impact our ability as public health officials to alleviate something in the future can help elevate the importance of this work in a community that may be very much so concerned with other things. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, Mr. Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Koh. Ms. Ahmad, just sort of following up on Mr. Belknap's question, it brought to mind a question for me. As you know, the census work is about to begin. What impact, if any, do you think that the COVID-19 situation might have on the census work?
So I have been monitoring just my own social media channels, and I tend to isolate one social media channel for all my like political stuff. And 2 weeks ago, I was seeing a lot of census outreach, and now that's been buried in COVID-19 related news stories and headlines. I think because the census is online and folks are home, there should be an extra incentive to just, complete it. However, given, the back and forth about the census at the federal level and what we saw earlier related to certain types of questions being included, there may still be a fear from that aspect in taking the census. I think we're in an uphill battle, a battle that, as public servants, we've seen many times before. So I'm not afraid of that, but there's definitely going to be a lot of work to educate and inform communities that although we're in the midst of a pandemic, we still have to take the census. It's of utmost importance for the future of our state and of our local communities.
So you talked a little bit about the possibility of distrust of government institutions and programs, and talked about your grandmother's experience. Does the commission have a role in improving public trust in government institutions?
I think the commission does, as we are extensions of the government. I think our work is dependent, if not led, by communities of interest and communities across California. If the commission were an all-star commission, we go out into a community and there's no trust from that community and nobody shows up or nobody provides public comment, it makes our work significantly harder. So I think we would have a role in kind of building that bridge between us as the commission and the community, and help folks understand that the whole reason this commission exists is because the people wanted it to exist. And kind of highlighting that although we are an entity of the government, we're an extension of the government, by far, the best one in the country. We are here because you asked us to be here. And I think that's what we need to highlight moving forward.
Do you mind if I ask you, how did you get interested in tobacco as a public health concern in the first place?
It was an accident. Tobacco control found me, and this was back when I was still at community college. I didn't really get involved much. I think I was a political science tutor for 2 quarters at Dianza, but aside from that, I didn't really know what we're supposed to do after high school. And I ended up at community college because that's what my friends were doing. My parents don't have a college education. My older brother dropped out. So I was the first in my family to go on this adventure. And I made a promise to myself that if I am one of the ones chosen to be accepted to San Jose State, I would make most of that opportunity. And within that was to apply for different internships. And when I applied for the tobacco control internship at San Jose State, I learned more about the topic, got really invested in it, and since then, doors have just been opening in that area. And I'm super blessed for that.
I wanted to ask you a couple questions. In your essay on impartiality, you talk about going to public meetings as representing the health department. You say oftentimes at community meetings there are folks present who express political ideas and affiliations I don't personally disagree with. However, we're gathered at these community meetings with a common goal. The common goal serves as a reminder of the purpose of the meeting. I'm not really sure, what is the common goal of the meeting?
So it depends on which meeting. So if it's a community meeting where we have different community-based organizations or just community members come out, when in our particular program, we would ask the group what is the goal of this meeting, what is the purpose, and really try to authenticate a community-driven effort. So in those particular meetings, folks might say, I've been experiencing an uptake in smoke drifting into my apartment, and I want this meeting to focus on that issue and how we can address that issue. So that's just an example of that type of setting. When it comes to city council meetings or board of supervisor meetings, obviously those are predetermined. And in those cases, it's listening to public comments from the community members related to the issue that I work in, and being able to digest all of those comments. And more recently, I've been really exploring this idea of how public comments are what the communities and public are concerned about. And if they're concerned about it, maybe there's gaps in research, and maybe there's areas that we can improve on to answer those questions or concerns before folks even come to the microphone.
You talked about being yelled at by clerks, I assume in a store. Ever been yelled at a public meeting?
No, I have not.
And if you were to be yelled at in a public meeting, how would you handle that?
I think we're in a very unique time where there's lots of training material online about how to handle yourself in a public meeting and as a government employee. So I think I would walk in with the understanding that the person who is yelling at me through this microphone is really upset, and they're really upset about something. And I'm choosing to be in this seat where I have made a commitment to help this individual. So I think the first step would just be recognizing and helping that person recognize that I'm listening and you will be heard by me. And then moving forward from there. Oftentimes that moment is out of fear or out of concern for something deeper than what we just see on the surface level. And everyone deserves to be heard, even if their tone is a little bit more elevated.
Thank you. One final question. In one of your responses to one of the standard questions, you used a term that caught my ear, cultural humility.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could define that term and expand on how that would inform your work on the commission if you're selected.
Yeah, so cultural humility is a concept in which one recognizes different cultures and how different cultures interact and interplay in our communities and in our systems. So I think where I would take that concept into the different communities is in the realm of understanding that I'm not going to be a familiar face to everyone in the room. My cultural practices, the way I choose to live my life is not going to be identical to everyone else in the room, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So understanding that folks have different approaches, different ways to handle things, to communicate, is going to be really imperative as we move forward. So for example, some cultures don't handshake. They'll put their hand on their heart and kind of bow. So understanding that that's not in any way, shape, or form being disrespectful to someone whose culture is to handshake, and understanding those differences going into these very diverse communities is going to be very helpful. Now everyone's culture in regards to handshakes should be elbows.
We have 16 minutes left in the 90-minute period. Do any of the panel members have any follow-up questions?
Ms. Dickinson?
I do not.
Mr. Bella?
I do not.
I have no follow-up questions.
Okay. Ms. Ahmad, at this point, I would like to ask you if you'd like to make a closing statement.
Sure. So I heard about this opportunity to apply through the radio, and when I heard it, the way the advertisement was framed as in shape California's future, it really caught my eye. And that's because California's future is actually my future. It's the future that hopefully one day I may raise children in. It's the future that my parents will age in. It's the future that my friends, family, neighbors are gonna live and thrive in. So I'm just very humbled and honored that I've made it this far in this process. And it would be an absolute honor to serve California in this manner. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ahmad, for being here today. Our next interview is scheduled to begin at 1:15 p.m., so we'll be in recess until 1:14.